I'm Sadia, as you know, and I'm the founder of
Yes.
Pixel Art Games Academy, and he is the founder of Pixel Art Academy. So that's how the people always confuse him and me on the Twitter all the time, and that's how we actually get to meet each other as well. And I'm really honored to have you here today. So let's start with a very important talk, and I'll hand over to you now. You can start with the talk and let our audience know what is your agenda for today.
Okay. Yeah, let me share my screen first of all, so you can see my presentation. Keynote. Share. And do you see the slides okay? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, let me know if the audio cuts out or anything like that. I guess there's gonna be a little bit of delay from here to there, but hopefully everything will go smooth. So yeah, today I'm gonna be talking to you about crowdfunding, especially for indie developers that yeah, small teams that wanna stay independent, and I'm gonna get into it, what exactly I mean quite soon. There we go. So yeah, this is me, Matej Jan, on the internet also known as Retro, and I write for a blog called Retronator. So this is my blog about pixel art and indie games. This is how it looks like. I write, oftentimes I write about crowdfunded video games as well. Lunark is one of them, for example, here. I also have a magazine, which is an online magazine, so not to be confused, but I like to make that about pixel art and this kind of stuff. I get to see a lot of different projects, and so I kind of have a slice of, I see everyone's projects in the pixel art scene, which is this kind of a nice little horizontal slice, because it has a lot of games from different genres, but the scene is still, it's getting bigger and bigger, but it's not super big. I can still know pretty much everything that's going on. And yeah, that's really nice to see, because I don't only hear about the projects that are on the top that get, you know, the most coverage, but I actually see from friends and people that I follow, I see also the kind of average successes, and also everyone that isn't able to make it using these kind of tools. Yeah, as Sadia said, I'm also a game developer. I am making and still making a game called Pixel Art Academy. So this is how that looks like. It's a pixel art game, an adventure game for learning how to draw. And so, like she said, yes, not to be confused. As you know, Pixel Art Games Academy is a real school. It's a school about video games, whereas Pixel Art Academy is a video game about a school. So yeah, it was kind of nice to get to know each other in this way. So my game, Pixel Art Academy, was on Kickstarter in 2015. So I've been working on it for 4 years now. It raised $62,000 about. And yeah, eventually, especially when you're working on a project this long, it was always going to be a long-term project. But, you know, Kickstarter is good to kickstart things, so to get you going. So now, as this money slowly, you know, I got through it. Right now, I am sustaining myself from Patreon, which is also another platform that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm also selling pre-orders of my game on my website. So together, all of this is how I make my living. So yeah, this talk will be, so from my firsthand experience, both as running these campaigns and as writing about other people's stuff in my magazine, and also from my own perspective. I also backed a lot of projects. I backed almost 100 projects of Kickstarter, so I see them from like a customer perspective. I support other people on Patreon, and I think by now together I probably put in $5,000 or more into crowd-funded projects. Just briefly, I'm going to be talking about crowdfunding in a narrow sense, which means usually Kickstarter, but I'm also, so I'm not going to focus just on that, but I'm going to talk about a broader picture. So any way how you can make money before you're releasing a video game. But with a very important thing, yeah, how can you remain in control doing that? Because we know, like, of course, you can go ask publishers for money, but you're usually giving something up, as in creative control or revenue share, this kind of thing. So here we're going to be focused on going straight to customers, straight to your players, and how to get money from that. All right. So we're going to look at this from a couple of different perspectives or lenses. The first one is going to be time of development. Where are you when you're deciding to when to start taking money, basically, from people? Here's how we're going to break it up. In the idea and mock-up phase, when you only have a couple of pictures or something to talk about, at this point, really crowdfunding is the main thing that you can do. Crowdfunding campaigns, there's two main ones. Indiegogo is the one that started first in 2008. It was for independent film or movie directors that were struggling how to get funds, and so they decided, okay, let's just go to people who want to watch these movies to get money. And then Kickstarter started in 2010, which was for all kinds of creative projects. And by now, Indiegogo also supports video games. So these are the two main platforms. I know that, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think none of these two platforms are actually available in Pakistan, just as much as they weren't available in Slovenia, where I'm originally from. And so I'm not going to go into super specifics about what's best practices for making a Kickstarter campaign. You can find a lot of other talks already from Game Developers Conference about that. So I'm just going to give you a wider overview of what are all of your options that are also hopefully going to be available for you. So yeah, Kickstarter really came onto, they started in 2010, but really became popular in 2012 when Double Fine Adventure started. And this was a project from Tim Schafer, one of the developers of Monkey Island, a quite very well-known person in the scene. And yeah, this is an example of a campaign that started just as an idea, just as a mock-up. The way they framed it was they got a couple of filmmakers that will create a documentary about them trying to create a point-and-click adventure. Publishers at that point really didn't want to put money into point-and-click adventures. They thought it was a dead genre, and they were like, okay, we're going to give it a try to this Kickstarter thing. We're either going to succeed or fail. It's all going to be recorded, so you will get, you know, at least a documentary out of it. And it was super successful. It was the first video game project to break over 1 million, and yeah, it raised 3 million, as you can see down there. Of course, in this kind of cases, it's very useful if you are a popular person to be able to make this kind of big budgets, but it's not necessary. My game essentially is the same thing. It was in a mock-up phase. All I had was screenshots, the ones you see there, or something like this, how my game is going to look like, but this is not an actual screenshot. So it's just something I drew up in Photoshop. And a lot of people just resonated with the idea itself. Hey, I would love to learn something when I play video games. So it's definitely possible if you have a really good concept. So yeah, that's crowdfunding. Another funny thing with crowdfunding happened because their legal got sad if they missed the campaign. So something emerged, kind of like extended crowdfunding. The main name you're going to hear in this space is BackerKit, which is pretty much, this is how it looks like. This is actually how Kickstarter campaign looks like when you finish it, and you get this little button, the blue button, where you can link to something. A lot of people link to their website or to their Steam account, and you can write whatever you want over there. Instead of pre-orders, it can be wishlist us on Steam. And then yeah, and some people link to their kind of extended crowdfunding campaign. So when you click on pre-orders for Narita Boy, for example, you get to BackerKit. So this is a BackerKit page, says how much the campaign was funded, and then you pretty much have the option to choose the same kind of perks that you were able to get in the crowdfunding campaign. This is just one way of taking money all throughout your release cycle. Next big one that you can also do from all the way from the start, even if you have an existing fan base, that are willing to follow, that are following your projects already, even when you're just starting to talk about a game that you will continue on working next. If you're accepting donations, they can already start supporting your projects. This is kind of an extension of something it was called donationware. I mean, it still is. So basically, when you create some sort of free software or free game, it used to be in the 90s when they would upload them to these systems called bulletin board systems, which was kind of pre-internet, where you could upload your video game and people could download it for free. And you could also include your home mail address and people would send you money just out of their generosity. Donationware, of course, is for release things, and then just taking donations, you can do it already before you even have a game released. The main thing how people do that is they have a PayPal button or any other kind of sorts of to pay money over the internet usually. And then nowadays Patreon is also another alternative how to do that. The biggest example for this is a game called Dwarf Fortress. Here's their support page. This is actually how it looks like nowadays. I don't think they changed it since 2000, so it kind of looks very old school HTML. But you can see they have a support button which goes to PayPal, and then the Patreon on the other side. And you can get these little crayon drawings that you see on the bottom if you send cash by mail to them. So they even support that kind of old school stuff. And then yeah, eventually they just joined Patreon as well. This is a graph of their campaign. They've been doing this for 4 years, 5 years now, I guess. And yeah, they make enough money like to sustain the two brothers that are developing the game. So yeah, and I'm gonna talk about Patreon a little bit more later. You have these options to put in different tiers of awards that you would get, kind of like on Kickstarter, and probably you're all familiar with how these things work, so I'm not gonna lose too much time on it. But the way Bay12 games use Patreon is pretty much just as a donation platform. They only have one tier, it's at $1, and people can give whatever money they want. And for the first years, they didn't even post updates on Patreon. It was just there as a donation front. So yeah, that's donations. Now in alpha phase, crowdfunding again is relevant because even more so, I would say, if it was possible to get games crowdfunded on ideas alone, it's definitely much harder now, especially because a lot of Kickstarted games take a long time to produce, mine including, and so sometimes people don't actually want to. They became more careful at backing games, so they like to see that you actually have something playable. So when you have a demo ready, this is usually when people nowadays go to crowdfunding. The same thing, of course, you can then extend your crowdfunding. So this is exactly the same as I talked before, just later on you already start with the demo. The main interesting thing when you do have alpha version, that a playable thing, is something that's called alpha funding. I really like this one. You pretty much charge people for an alpha version of your game at the full price. So all you need is an online store. So PayPal or Stripe checkout, you could include. I think these are also not available for you, but yeah, probably you have another system of how to process online payments that's going to be useful for you. Another, and this one I think would be available for you, Humble Widget, which I'm going to talk about Humble a little bit later as well. This is a way for you've probably heard of Humble Bundles, which were these kind of packets of indie games that you could buy at pay what you want price. They created a Humble widget that you can include on your website, and you can sell your games through it, and they will take care of transactions and that kind of stuff. So that's very useful, and I think you should also be able to use it. Another very popular way of alpha funding is Steam Early Access. So getting your game on early access, as in, yeah, it's not done yet, it needs polish, and you would like for people to give you feedback or, and help you develop the game and get rid of the bugs or improve gameplay while you're doing it. Here are examples. The first one, this is pretty much the ones who started alpha funding. Was a company called Wolfire. So they created the game Overgrowth, I think in 2011, or no, wait, earlier, 2008 already. So it's been in development for like 11 years now. And yeah, and they just started that, hey, you can buy the alpha version. We're gonna start releasing whatever we have of our game every week. And you can pay $30 to pre-order it. And they would put out a YouTube video every week, what's new in the alpha. And yeah, it was a very good thing for them. And they are also the people who then started the Humble Bundle as one of their kind of marketing experiments. And what you see here, this box, is actually the Humble widget that I mentioned. This is how it looks like. You can pay with a card or through PayPal, whatever is available. And yeah, and you will get Humble will take 5% off of it, and then you get the rest of the money. So you can just embed it into your website. This is how early access looks like. You're probably all familiar. Very useful for games that are very streamable. I found out about Clone Drone in Danger Zone by looking at YouTubers playing it, and this is how it can spread. And because it's alpha, people can already play it, it just kind of generates a loop of more people playing it and then more people knowing about it. It's the same as for any kind of long-term game that's going to be played for a while. After release, you can just start doing it earlier. There's pretty much no big downsides of it for games that are supposed to be played for a long time. You can also just, like I said, integrate it into your own online store. This is how I have it for Pixel Art Academy, because it's a game that runs in the browser. I really don't need to throw people out of the process. So in my game, you actually buy the game while you're inside of the game. You kind of go to my website, which is already like a text point-and-click adventure, and then you can just buy it in the store that you visit there, which is a little bit crazy, but yeah, I kind of like it that way. Just so that people actually know what they're getting into. If they are able to navigate my game, they will probably like it. And yeah, it's just to make sure that people are happy with what they're getting. So yeah, basically alpha funding, like I said, it's doing it before release. After release, it's just normal selling of your game, obviously. So not much different. Pre-release, so this would be just before you are finished with the game and you still have some missing pieces. Again, you could go to crowdfunding. I've seen examples of this. For example, some people do it for marketing purposes, especially for non-video game projects when they just want to start selling some sort of physical merchandise. But it's also useful for video games. If you have just something small to finish, for example, a game Don't Give Up, they had a working game pretty much like 80% complete, but they wanted to pay another artist to improve the portraits in the game, or pay a musician to put music on it, just kind of the final touches. And they didn't even ask for a lot of money because of that. They also didn't have that big of an audience, but it's a way to get things done. And Don't Give Up is actually a little bit of a special, it has a little bit more of a backstory to it, because it actually, before this, they already had a Kickstarter campaign which brought in the initial wave of money. So this was, the last one was in 2019, and this one was about half a year earlier. And because it brought $5,000. This is not something that you can sustain yourself, especially not in the United States, for a year. And so, but at that time for them, it was like, well, we either do this campaign this low and the game will have a chance at it, or the game won't exist at all. And it's interesting that it's called Don't Give Up, because not only was this their previous Kickstarter, they had an even earlier Kickstarter. At that time, the game was called Cynical 7, and it didn't succeed. So it was kind of fun. This was in 2017. I really liked the game. I played the demo. They did everything kind of right, but they just didn't have the, fan base or reach for a Kickstarter campaign. And so they renamed it into Don't Give Up, kind of fittingly, and they did succeed. And so, yeah, for them, it meant this kind of persistent meant that they eventually finished the game, and it's now out on Steam. Although based on the amount of reviews, I don't think it actually made that much money for them. So it's kind of, if you see that you're struggling with the Kickstarter campaigns, it's probably going to be somewhat reflected into your final release. So it's doing Kickstarter campaigns and stuff like this is also kind of a market. You kind of see how the game is going to do, but not necessarily, as we're going to see soon in the next examples. So yeah, that's crowdfunding. Another way to make money just before release, if you're starting to run out of money, actually this is what happened to Broken Age, to Double Fine. The ones that I mentioned were the first to break 1 million on Kickstarter, because, so they got 3 million, but because their vision kind of expanded, they ran out of money, essentially. And in the documentary that they were filming, you can actually see their decisions behind the scenes, how they could save the project. So they decided that they're going to break up the content of the game into two episodes. So they released one episode on Steam. I don't think at the time it was even early access. It was just released as a first episode completely. And then the sales generated from the first episode, they could fund the completion of the second one, which is super useful if you have already a very polished version of your game at the start. It also applies to smaller games. This is an example of an indie game, Foxtail. It did not succeed on Kickstarter, but the developers kept going, kept working on it. And I think a couple of years later, they released into early access, and they just put up the first episode. And so when they started generating some revenue, they could take more time off from their day jobs to work on it. And they were working on episode 2 and now episode 3. So it's a viable way to release something that's already polished. In fact, I think I need to, I'm not sure if you see my camera there. I think I need to remove it for this. So yeah, here we go. Basically, this concept is not even that new. In kind of the 90s, a lot of games were distributed in this way. It was called shareware. And the first episode, they usually actually just made free, and it was freely shared across users. That's why it was called shareware. It was not like a demo nowadays, which is kind of a very small look into the game. It was quite self-contained narrative episode or gameplay-wise. And a lot of companies that you will know from the 90s, I'll do this again in case it makes a difference for you. Yeah, some companies that you would know, like id Software, known for Doom and Quake, did Wolfenstein 3D in this way. So you would get the first episode, and for the rest ones, you would have to, there would be a mail address where you can order it. Epic Games started in this way as well in the 90s. So yeah, this is how we used to do it back in the 90s. So yeah, that's the kind of look at where in the development you can start crowdfunding. Next up, we're going to look at what you're actually selling, because it's not only the game that you can get money for while you're developing it. So we're gonna, besides the game, so there's a couple of others factors that I can talk about. Yes, if you're focusing on the game, if you have the game, if you have an alpha version, then of course you're going to be selling that. If you have already finished some part of the game, you can put it in episodic releases. You can do that. But then the difference comes on crowdfunding. Some people, if they are fans of you and they like to follow your kind of story, will be willing to fund your projects, even though they might not even be that interested in the projects itself as a game. They're interested in following how you're gonna make your dreams come true. So that's why it's really useful for crowdfunded projects to be passion projects, because they want to see that kind of a spark, their happiness in creator that can start making a living from this. Similarly, for patronage, this is also useful for the same reasons and even other aspects, as they will explain now. So patronage, if you like in the very old school days, like the Renaissance and before, artists usually had like big patron, like one wealthy patron that would pay them so that they would be able to create their art. On this kind of a similar notion, a company called Patreon was made. It's kind of like Kickstarter, but instead of giving it for projects that are, you know, they're just like a one-time crowdfunding campaign, it was really started for people who create content on a weekly or monthly basis. So for YouTube creators, was started by a musician, Jack Conti, who was really not happy how much money he was getting out of YouTube ads. And so, yeah, so he created a site where people could donate to him every time he puts out a music video. And eventually it turned out into a subscription service, so that also a lot of video game developers use, where you get money from your fans every month. And it really is, the point is, most of the time, to really be invested into the creator behind it. You will support their projects and to get updates from them and see how they're doing, you know, what they're working on. You kind of see behind the scenes and you get to be part of their life. So yeah, that's Patreon. Here are some examples. Here's again, on the right, you see a graph of how, you know, over time, you can grow your audience, get more patrons, and bring in more earnings. And so it's a kind of a long-term process. As you can see, this is, for example, for 4 years. It really depends. You will see very different graphs of how much people make money on this platform. It's really interesting to see the different models. Yeah, it's useful for any kind of, like, if you're just starting out, if you're later, for example, Pixelated Crown, this is Chelsea Saunders. She was popular on Tumblr before, so she had like a big following, and so she just created Patreon to post this kind of monthly newsletters out what she's working on. And, you know, when she would start working on a new game, she would tell people about it. So even if it's just in an idea phase, it would be interesting for people to see that part of the process as well. So it's really useful for all the way from the start through the finish line. Here's another example. This one is actually one of the biggest Patreons. Rebecca Cordingley is creating a game called Ooblets, and you can see that this one, the green line means how much money she was getting, and at one point she decided to actually turn that off, because on the profile you can show how many patrons you have and how much money you're making. And at one point the Patreon enabled that you can hide that number, and a lot of people that earn $1,000 or more actually decide to not show it. And you can see that when she decided, she was already making over $2,000. So this is pretty okay. And her, I think, partner that was also able to quit his job and just focus on the game thanks to this. And yeah, she doesn't, it's important to note that she doesn't even have a demo. People can't play Ooblets. They just love the characters, the world that she's creating, and they just want to be part of this story and follow her for the updates of how she's doing it. So yeah, that's patronage. It's not 100% necessary to do this to follow the story. You could also, some people are also going to be focusing on just of the game. For example, Unity Station is a remake of a role-playing game, Space Station. So if you're a fan of Space Station 13 and you want to get a version that works today, you're going to be interested in this project. Similarly, one of my friends is creating a game like an RPG, like 90s RPG that is very much similar to Daggerfall, like the Elder Scrolls Daggerfall or Betrayal of Krondor. And if you're a person where you hear Betrayal of Krondor and you're like, oh my God, this is a game I really love, you're gonna support this project. So it's not that much about the creator themselves and their story. It's really just about, hey, I want to play the game that, you know, I loved in the past. I want to have something like that now. I also want to mention that you can combine Kickstarter and Patreon. You can combine these approaches. This is an example of a Kickstarter project, I think from 2011, actually. So before even things got very popular with Double Fine. And yeah, it was Kentucky Route Zero. They started in 2011. They thought they started a small campaign to pay for software and musicians and for living expenses for the next 9 months. They thought they're gonna be done in 9 months. They weren't, they were a little bit too optimistic. It took them 2 years to create the first version, and it wasn't even just, it wasn't the whole game. They said, well, I can read that from their website. They said, we'll be releasing it in 5 acts, with Act 1 coming in December 2012 and the rest coming every 2 to 3 months throughout 2013. So they delivered Act 1 2 years after the campaign, and then they did release Act 2 in May 2013, so they were kind of like that 3-4 months schedule, but then the next episode came out only in May 2014, so it took, again, another year to just create part 3. And then for part 4, it actually took 2 years, so it came out in July 2016. And then from that point on, the final episode actually came out last month, so it took them from 2016 to 2020 to create the 4th episode. So something that they thought will take 9 months actually ended up more like 9 years. So yeah, that's a video game development for you. So they had a Kickstarter campaign, and then so they pretty much made episodic releases. Like I said, you can do that to generate money. And then at the end, because the last episode was 4 years, they also started Patreon. This was actually because their players were saying, like, I bought the game 3 times already because I really support the project. I really want to help you out. If there was another way that I could give you money, I would. And so, yeah, they saw like, okay, a lot of people are on Patreon, let's put our game there. And yeah, so they were able to throughout the end of their development for the last year and a half, they were able to get money, sustainable income from Patreon as well. And as it turns out, Kentucky Route Zero is one of the best games out there from the Polygon named it the 4th best game of the whole decade from 2010 to 2019. So yeah, it just came out in its full version. It was one of the most well-received games. So sometimes a little small dream on Kickstarter that doesn't even make that much money can lead to a really big success. Another example of a really successful game that didn't look like that way on Kickstarter was Peace Island. So it, 300 backers, $13,000. However, when they released on Patreon, so they also did this switch. When they released on Patreon, now they have 7 times the patrons, and every month they get more money than they did on Kickstarter, just one time. And this is really one of the biggest projects. So as you'll see in the later on, it's not something that you can count on happening, but it is kind of possible. And just to kind of show you that, yeah, you can combine different crowdfunding platforms as well. You can also, so yeah, your Patreon campaign can also be useful for other things. For example, for art, if you're an artist, here's an example of a pixel artist, Octavio Navarro. He creates these little illustrations that everyone loves. And yeah, so he was able to just kind of create, it's not very big income, but it's something. And then he was able to start releasing this small little video game that also a lot of people love. So it's, it's something, if you're already an artist, it's a good way to go. I do the same thing with Pixel Art Academy. But the way I did it is I made so when you are on Patreon, you can create these different tiers of how much people support, and you try to give them different rewards for it. And so what I did is for the $5 tier, it's called the Art Collector tier, you get all of my kind of wallpapers and posters that I've done. So you get, like, I've already made like hundreds of wallpapers. So yeah, you just get this. It's useful for something that you already done and you can just put out as an extra reward for people. Then if you have good art, you can also sell merch or merchandise. This comes in a couple of flavors. You can sell digital goods with something like Gumroad or Shopify. You would just put it into your website. Then there are services that create physical products for you. Society6, you can sell posters, t-shirts, different kind of stuff. Redbubble is very similar. And you don't have to handle the merchandise. You just upload your designs and people can buy it. Then you have a little bit more specialized stores that are also, that you can just upload, but you have to have kind of a partnership with. Again, they're also specialized for games. And then Patreon also recently started offering merchandise. You have to be in a higher tier where they take a bigger percentage of your revenue, but yeah, they also offer you merchandise. So here's an example from Ublets, because people really love all of the designs that Rebecca does. And they were emailing her constantly, hey, can we have t-shirts? So she eventually, yes, here you go. And so she partnered with the Yeti and posted them out. It's kind of hard to find numbers, how much money this actually makes. One example that is not that optimistic is a game called Unknown Realms. Raised quite a lot of money because it was a physical release it was supposed to be a physical release for Commodore 64 as well. So usually things that require hardware or like actual physical copies raise more money just because the backing prices are higher up. But however, they thought they were gonna be done in 1 year, and then now it's been 3 years. So 2 years in, when they were kind of running out of money, they felt like, okay, how can we make some sort of income on the side? And they came up with the idea of these feelies, which are kind of in the nature of old video games that had all of this cool stuff, like little maps inside, things that you can hold. That's why they're called feelies. Yeah, and they were gonna create this kind of a subscription of this kind of merchandise that you open and get surprised by. But yeah, the idea eventually didn't go far, and they said in a recent update that yeah, it pretty much just covered their internet and hosting bills. So merchandise might be something that you put way more time into it than it will actually generate money out of it in the end. So yeah, that's merch. Then one big category actually is you could be selling your tools, things that you've created during the development of your games, tools or assets and art. So you've probably, if you're using Unity, you've probably heard of the asset store where you can find a lot of useful code. Similarly, Unreal Engine has their own marketplace. That's one way how to get things that you've made to people. Another one is if you have some sort of standalone software, you can upload it to itch.io, and Steam also now carries software. Maybe you've seen things like Sprite is a pixel art, for example, tool. Even Blender, which is free, runs on Steam. You can download it from Steam. And then a lot of people would just take donations as well. So Patreon again and PayPal.
We're running short on time, so we can keep some time for Q&A if you don't mind.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so so here we are, yeah, Unity store, you kind of know how it looks like. So, gonna kind of skip over this Unreal Engine, and this is for a scripting engine for writing narrative games. They make money this way. It's completely free, so it's donationware. Another example is Twine. They make more money, and another one is like a way to make HTML5 games. So these are just examples of, yeah, people like when they turned off the finances, they already made $2,000, and this was before that spike. So it is possible to raise quite some money using tools, and people make everything. This, for example, they are working on shaders or a similar tool for making different voxel art. Yeah, so there's just a lot of examples. And some people actually treat it pretty much like a storefront. If they're on Patreon, this Puck Loves Games just has a list of different shaders that they sell on their website, and then each one is just a link back to Patreon. Where you can get it for if you're in the $5 tiers. Same for art, so there's just a lot of examples. This one makes style sets, you can make pixel art fonts, and you can again combine things. So you can have them on Patreon, and for example here they also sell them on itch.io. Some more, yeah, these are just more examples of people selling their tools. Final other category of income would be charging money for knowledge, basically, tuition. So yeah, if you can teach somebody something, people will be willing to give you money for, and people do that through Patreon. There's a space, there are specialized teaching spaces like Skillshare and Udemy, where some people make money. And then of course you could also just upload it to YouTube and rely on ads, but most often people will go to Patreon, which is why Patreon was started, because YouTube revenue wasn't actually that big. One of my favorite examples is Slynerd. He creates free tutorials. So it's also somebody I support because I have a little small fund that I give to other people that are creating free resources for people. So he creates them completely for free. People give money to him, and he can spend time working on his game while doing it. I would say he splits his time 50-50 between making tutorials and then working for the art on Tyrion Defenders. And so he would post on Patreon both the tutorials and the art progress on the game. There are others that have just specialized game development tutorials. So yeah, there's a lot of examples of people that can easily make more than $1,000 on Patreon and even more. So these are kind of examples of the more successful ones. Here's just an example that, yeah, like usually you will always see Patreon campaigns are actually pretty stable. But at this point, for example, at the peak, Pedro Medeiros was already kind of made, I think, over 50 tutorials, and he was kind of like, okay, it's time to move on. And so he, yeah, so at that point he was just, I need to, you know, like he moved on, and so people then slowly start dropping off because the content that he was kind of creating also dropped off, but not actually that much. Like he's still making, like a year or two later, he's still making a decent living off of it. So yeah, these are the Skillshare, for example, and Udemy. There's a lot of resources for game development and pixel art and any other kind of things that you would be interested in. So if you have a real kind of if you like teaching and you're good at it, that's definitely a way to go. And again, yeah, you can combine it with Kickstarter or different kind of ways. So here's 3 campaigns that the person who did the pixel art course here did, yeah, also Kickstarter campaigns before it. So yeah, this is kind of a look at different things where you can get money from. Next category I wanna go over is when you're deciding on how are you gonna price your things, so both your game and or your this kind of alternative sources of income. Is it gonna be paid or free? And you have a couple of approaches how to get these to people then. So self-publishing would be just selling it on your website, like PayPal or Stripe Checkout is just having your online store. They take a 2 to 4% cut. Humble Widget, I already mentioned, is how you can do pre-alpha funding, but yeah, you could also be selling any kinds of things. They will take 5% off of it. And then if you're doing free software, I also suggest GitHub, where you can upload the source code, and they also have free hosting for the website. So that's self-publishing. Then you have distribution platforms. You kind of know this probably already. Steam, if you're doing for mobile, Good Old Games also has their own thing. This is the classical 30% split that you have. Humble Store, where some part also goes to charity, you take 25% off of it. And then Itch.io is actually the most kind of indie friendly. They suggest 10%, but it's actually adjustable. You can select how much goes to them, plus fees. Then for crowdfunding platforms, I already talked about them. It's Kickstarter and Indiegogo. They all take 5%, and then fees, which are also like I said, 2 to 4% for credit card processing. But yeah, crowdfunding is of course for things that you would pay for, so not really for free projects. Whereas patronage on the other side, I think it's best for things that you can get for free and then pay what you want so that people can donate as much as. Some people are just gonna pay like $1, some people are gonna give you $10, and that's how you get to that $5 average that you kind of get. And then for free software, for anything that you make free, you can, yeah, just take donations. There's no harm in doing that. The next way to look at it is team size. This is kind of important because it limits you to what kind of things you can do. So merch and tuition, kind of like I showed, doesn't really, it makes tools can be if they're really popular, but probably also not. It's usually something for solo, but it could be for small teams as well. Patronage as well. It's actually not really, if you have a bigger team, it's just not going to work out. And I want to show you why. Here's a graph of all of there's about 900 Patreon campaigns in the games category. And you can see that, and so they're listed from left to right, how many patrons they have. So the top one would have almost 8,000 backers, but the big majority doesn't actually have almost no backers. So I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit so that we can talk about this. You can see what's going on. So for example, here, if you have on the left, you can see if you have 50 patrons, you're already going to be in the top 10% of all the Patreon accounts. Similarly, for if you have 100 patrons, this is gonna be, you know, top 6%. So only 500 people are gonna have 100 patrons or more. And you can be asking, well, how much money can you make with 100 patrons? If we look at the data, here are kind of listed people around the 500 spot that have 100 patrons. In this column, you can see how much per month that would be. Or sorry, how much per person that would be. The previous column has how much per month, and this is per person. So you can see that per backer, you can get very widely, either $2 or up to like $8. So it's really going to depend on how you set your tiers, what kind of followers you have, but kind of as a rule of thumb, you will be getting about $5 per backer or per patron in general. So yeah, that's kind of like good thing to know, that while I'm showing you these examples of people that have 50 or more patrons, you got to understand that there's also, for every one of those, there's also 9 others that are making way less or close to nothing. So it really is kind of reserved for people that really go seriously into this. So that's patronage. So then if you have a bigger team to fund, like even medium, really the only options are, yeah, crowdfunding or alpha funding. You have to have a complete game, or you have to have an actual game that's gonna drive sales, basically, because then the sales, if the game becomes popular, it can generate kind of take off revenue, especially because the prices are bigger. Like if you're gonna sell your game for like $20, you can sustain a studio off of that. All right, so I just have 2 more, fan base. So hopefully we won't run too much over time. Fan base, this one I think is the most important category actually, because it depends on, again, on what kind of, how big projects basically you can do. And here I have them kind of listed this way. When you are unknown and you don't have completely, you know, nobody knows about you, you can still, and you need some money, you can still do tools and tuition, because they will be able to find you through the asset store. They don't actually need to know you personally. They will search for whatever people need and they will be able to come to you. Then if you, a really good way to get started is to take donations or pay what you want. So create something that's free and then make it available for people. Anything that's free is always going to be, and everything that's free that's useful to people or that it's playable will be a good way to get your following started, while you can also get some money for it. And then patronage is also just goes from all the way, for, like I showed, from the start when you are, it's kind of especially good from the start. Even if you're just starting out, I would put out the Patreon campaign, because it's a really nice thing that it can grow with you. So here, for example, some examples. Yeah, if you look at it for the first half of a year, Lovely Hellplays didn't have a lot of patrons. It was basically like 10 or 20. And, you know, if you look at it this way, it can be a little bit disheartening. But you just have to keep going. And for example, yeah, here one of his games was featured by some YouTuber. You know, it took off, and now he has, you know, close to 100 patrons, which you can already start being like at least part-time, if not full-time thing for you. There's many examples like this, how earnings will just slowly grow over time. And yeah, just remember that it's a long-term thing. It's usually better to start early. So that's why also, yeah, if you don't have a big following, I would just start. And be prepared for everything. This is a campaign that's been going on for 4 years, and you know, they just have like $400 per month. So like I said, Patreon's very, very wildly. Finally, yeah, alpha funding or episodic releases. Also good for pretty much anyone, because you have a playable demo out. It's way easier to get people interested in your project if they can play something. So it's, you know, from if you're not nobody to if you're already popular and you put something out, people will like it. And then crowdfunding, I want to touch on this because this one is the only category I don't think you should do unless you have a following, and especially and it really needs quite a big following. So it can be done if you're just like 1,000 followers on Twitter or something like that, but really it's more for 10,000 followers and that kind of stuff. And here's why, kind of. So here's the kind of smaller people that I see put stuff out on Kickstarter, and they don't even get or just barely get to 100 backers. And the thing is, they ask for small goals, even if goals are very small, like $5,000, they will come short of it because just 100 people just isn't enough to get there. And these people would actually be, and even on $5,000, a small goal, it's not something you're going to be able to sustain yourselves. So these people are actually would be way better off being on Patreon, because if you think about it, they have found their core fans, their core 100 people that really want to support them. And so if they were on Patreon, they would be able to, at the rule of thumb,
We have to
$5 per
wrap up.
backer.
Sorry.
Okay, we'll do.
Sorry. We are very late now. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, because we also started late. I will just wrap up exactly after this one. So yeah, I just wanted to say it's yeah, it's something you would go on Patreon because you will be able to generate $250 or $500 every month. So yeah, I do have a lot of examples of bigger campaigns as well, but mainly for crowdfunding is, yeah, you need to be able to get like about 1,000 backers. And then here are just like a lot of examples. This is mainly how the average campaign is going to be like. And for this, you need like at least 10,000 backers or more, or 10,000 fans already on your social media. Smaller campaigns can work, but they need to have a much smaller goal. And then for the bigger campaigns that make $500,000, $1 million, this is really reserved for just people that are just some examples. And yeah, so this is kind of what I'm gonna, I guess, stop on. One final thing that I want to mention is looking at all of these kind of Kickstarter campaigns. I have been tracking them over a time. I've been tracking when they were funded, when they said that they will deliver, and then when they actually deliver the product. And so I compare how many months they estimated that they're going to need to deliver. So for example, Broken Age, they thought they were going to be done in like seven months. And then what they actually delivered was in 22 months. And so that's how I calculate the lateness factor. And so just as an example, so yeah, pretty much the average right now is 3 times. So people will
Can we get this data?
underestimate how much time they're going to take. Sorry?
Can we get this data for analysis or something to understanding?
If you can get the data, you mean?
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I can share it. I have it on, like, yeah, I can share. It's an open spreadsheet that I can share to others. The main point is you will most of people will underestimate how much funds they will need. So eventually they will run out of money, which again is why it's useful to have a Patreon campaign, which is an ongoing thing and that can slowly grow. Yeah, final thing was just kind of game type. If your game is narrative heavy, it's way better to do kind of crowdfunding campaigns. Whereas for alpha funding, it's really good if you have things that are focused on mechanics that people can play over and over, because you're also going to be completing the game more and more. And so they will be able to play more and more versions. So sorry, I don't have time to go into this. This is kind of a wrap up of what I've talked about. Sorry for running a bit long, but yeah, that's my talk. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk and for such well-researched case studies and information that you gave. I think it will be very useful for our audience, and we will, of course, we have recorded the talk and we'll share the recorded version of the talk, and we may be able to share the data with it so that people can understand and plan their crowdfunding campaigns accordingly. And if you guys have any quick questions, anybody, then they can tell me right now, but I think we are late for Kate's talk. So we can, you have your Twitter handle here. If the audience has questions,
Yes,
they can
exactly.
tweet you the question. You can answer that.
All
Yes.
the time. I am very happy to answer any of your questions.
So please take a screenshot of his Twitter handle. If you want to ask any question, just tweet him and he'll answer. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful and so honored to have you here. We are signing off now before the next session, but we will talk to you later. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye.